Hey y'all, welcome back to Flick Connection. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about my absolute top recommendations out of everything available on Max right now. So if you have a Max subscription, you'll get some good recommendations, but these are also great recommendations if you're just interested in getting a free trial, or if you just want to find out if Max is maybe worth investing your time in. And they've got a ton of great movies that didn't make this list. You know, they've got all the Batman movies, all that DC stuff, a bunch of action movies. I'm skipping that stuff and sticking to the real cream of the crop. In fact, I've broken this list up into action, drama, comedy. I've even got some series on this list, and per usual, I've got a handful of really weird movies I love recommending. Thanks to Factor for sponsoring this video, but let's start with that action category with a movie that doesn't quite qualify as an action movie. Good Time. Now, there is a fair amount of action in this movie, but it's all very grounded, very realistic, and again, do not get me wrong, you would not normally classify this as an action movie, but I wanted to start this list off with it. This is from the Safdie brothers, who would go on to create Uncut Gems, and Good Time has a very similar aesthetic and a very similar sense of urgency. I also happen to think this is one of Robert Pattinson's first really tremendous roles. Now, he's had quite a few since this movie, but this is the first time I saw him in a completely different light. And I gotta admit, I'm also very partial to the aesthetic and the score that they made for this movie. It's all very neon and moody. I love crime movies like Good Time, and Good Time is not only a good one, it also feels artsy, new, and fresh. In fact, it was so new and fresh when it came out 8 years ago that it still feels new and fresh today. And now, believe it or not, I've got Speed on this list.
It can't be true.
Why?
Now, I know most of you are used to me recommending movies that you likely haven't heard of, and Speed is a movie certainly everyone watching has seen, but I gotta say, they just recently put it on Max. I have not seen Speed in years, mainly because I have not seen it available on streaming in a very, very long time. And I forgot how solid this movie was. And don't get me wrong, I've always known that Speed has been one of the great action movies of the 90s, but my goodness, rewatching it today, it's almost upsetting that they don't make movies like this anymore. And they really don't. All the big budget action movies go to either science fiction or superhero movies, and then all the tough, gritty stuff just, I don't know, it gets downgraded. If you've seen Den of Thieves 2, it's an embarrassment what has happened to action movies in general, but Speed, my goodness, is such a crowd pleaser, but also a totally badass action movie where Keanu Reeves is doing a lot of his own stunts. I mean, there's no CGI in this movie. It's all happening for real, and yes, some of it's ridiculous, but in the most entertaining way possible. But I had such a good time watching Speed and such a hard time trying to think of other movies remotely like it, but Max has one that I've also rewatched recently. Tony Scott's final film, Unstoppable, is also just a fast-paced stunt showcase that's almost as good as Speed. I highly recommend revisiting both of these movies as soon as you can, if you're a sucker for action movies like I am. But speaking of sci-fi, I've got two on this list that I have found to be just unusually rewatchable over the years. First up, we've got Dredd.
Negotiations over.
Just an incredible Judge Dredd movie. It completely ignores and forgets that the Stallone one even existed and is its own take on a Dredd flick. And instead of just trying to make it an origin story or this big thing about Judge Dredd, it's actually a fairly simplified story that's very similar to the movie The Raid: Redemption, and Dredd does such a good job of fleshing out all the other characters while keeping Judge Dredd as kind of this straightforward, by-the-law type of character, and it's got a killer aesthetic. There's this drug that slows everything down that's actually called slow-mo, and all of that stuff is just visually dazzling, on top of it being a badass action movie. And then one that's way less badass, but is one of the most visually stunning sci-fi movies released in the past decade, is Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets.
Good one.
Now, this one came out to mixed reviews, and I can kind of see why, but as someone who has rewatched this movie a bunch, it is just a ton of fun. It's from Luc Besson, who's done a bunch of great movies like La Femme Nikita, Leon the Professional, but most notably in this case, he did The Fifth Element, and I really do think Valerian is every bit as good as The Fifth Element. It maybe suffers from a bit of fakery. It looks like it's all CGI. It's almost like watching an animated movie. Whereas The Fifth Element had a lot more tactile elements, but still, if you enjoy The Fifth Element and you somehow have never seen Valerian, it comes with a strong recommendation. Just know that I'm recommending this as just kind of a blast of a visually dazzling sci-fi movie with a lot of entertaining elements. It's not a solid movie that I think will hold up for decades, but certainly an underrated one. Now we're moving over to the drama category, and I'm going to start this segment off with a Chinese flick, a crime movie that would later be adapted into one of my favorite movies from Martin Scorsese, The Departed. But in China, it's titled Infernal Affairs.
What's the difference?
Now, they actually have the whole trilogy of Infernal Affairs, but right here I'm just recommending the original. It is a tightly wound crime thriller, and even though you will have to read subtitles for it, and even though you will know what's coming multiple times, it is still such an amazing movie. I highly recommend it, and if you enjoy it, I do recommend pursuing the second and third installments. And then they've also got the first feature film from the Coen brothers, a movie that I still think is one of their best, Blood Simple.
The less you know about it, the better.
Now this, while it does have some humor in it, it is not a quintessential Coen brothers comedy. In fact, this has a lot more in common with Fargo and No Country for Old Men. So if you enjoy either of those two movies, you have to see Blood Simple. And it's worth keeping in mind that this is their first feature film and that they did raise the money to make this completely on their own. Not beginning indie movies, but certainly they gave the indie movie industry a big old shot in the arm. They did, and Sam Raimi with Evil Dead. So Evil Dead and Blood Simple actually have a fair amount in common with regards to their contributions to indie filmmaking, but again, Fargo, No Country for Old Men fans, Blood Simple is a must watch. Now I've got a couple more dramas coming up, including a great heist flick. Then I've got some weird movies that I love recommending, even though they're not for everybody. We've also got comedies and some series to get to on this list. But first, I want to tell you how today's sponsor, Factor, has been helping me stay in shape. With their fresh, never frozen meals, I've been eating like a king at lunchtime. And yes, the food is good, but it's food that is contributing to me, staying in shape like this. But Factor also lets me skip all the grocery shopping, prepping, cooking, and cleanup. Each week, I get to pick from up to 30 chef-crafted meals that are all designed to help support a healthy lifestyle. Whether that's protein plus, keto, vegan and veggie, or more wholesome options, Factor has you covered, making it easy to incorporate this into your diet. And like I said, these meals are never frozen. They show up to your door, ready to eat. They'll stay fresh in your fridge for about a week, and they only take 2 minutes to heat up in the microwave. Everything I've had from Factor has been delicious. I've particularly enjoyed the shredded chicken thigh cacciatore, and jalapeno lime cheddar chicken has been one of my longtime favorites. I love getting one of these in almost every order. They even have gourmet plus options like this grilled steakhouse filet mignon. I mean, for a reheated steak, it's incredibly tender. The cook on it's fantastic, and it comes with some great sides to, again, help support that healthy lifestyle. And for a limited time, my viewers are going to save 50% off their first order with Factor, plus free shipping on that first box. All you got to do is visit factor75.com and use my code 50FlickConnection. Again, that's going to save you 50% off your first order with Factor and get you the free shipping. It's a great deal on a product I truly love. I'm always excited when Factor shows up on my front porch, so I highly recommend trying it out. But speaking of things I recommend, let's get back to the movies, starting with that heist flick, The Bank Job, which I think is one of Jason Statham's most underrated movies. And there's nothing mind-blowing going on in The Bank Job. It is exactly what it looks like, but it's got kind of a retro vibe, and it works. I mean, this is an old-school bank robbery movie that is a blast to watch All the characters are fun. They're digging tunnels. They're doing it old school with walkie-talkies that have antennas that are 4 feet long. And it doesn't have the silliness that you often get with Jason Statham movies. It's just a straightforward bank heist movie, and it honestly couldn't be any better than it is. Now next up, I've got one from Denmark. You will have to read subtitles, and it's a very talky movie, but they actually remade The Guilty into a Netflix original starring Jake Gyllenhaal, and I don't think it had nearly the impact that the original did. If you've seen the Netflix movie, then you kind of know what happens, and it may take away some of the impact, but if you have not seen it, I strongly recommend the original version over that Netflix version. The setup here is very simple. You're following an emergency call operator. Here in America, we call it 911, but it's the version of 911 in Denmark, and you follow one phone operator, and he gets a very disturbing call and ends up having to solve a mystery all completely over the phone. Now, you're only ever seeing him on his side of the phone, yet somehow the drama in this movie grabs you and will not let you go until the end. You can see the footage I'm showing you here. That's all the movie looks like, but the story that it unfolds is like beyond compelling. If you don't mind reading the subtitles, I highly recommend this movie.
And I'm watching it tonight.
And then another one you will have to read subtitles for, but keep in mind, these are my absolute top recommendations out of everything on Max right now. They've got Seven Samurai. Now, one of the good things about Max is they have Turner Classic Movies included, so they've got a ton of classic movies, but one of my all-time favorites is still Seven Samurai. This came out in 1954, even though it looks a bit older, but they would later turn this into The Magnificent Seven in America, and I'll say Seven Samurai is better than The Magnificent Seven. Now, it's very long, it's about 4 hours, and the first 2 hours are fairly slow. They're recruiting people. It's got a pace to it from 1954. It does not have a 2025 pace to it, but not only is it a piece of history, it is just an amazingly well-directed samurai flick. It's easily one of the greatest of all time. And if you get into it, they have even more samurai movies available on Max, like Yojimbo, which was turned into Fistful of Dollars with Clint Eastwood.
Get 3 coffins ready.
Even Last Man Standing with Bruce Willis was loosely based off of Yojimbo. But with that, we're gonna move on to my weird recommendations. I've got a penchant for weird movies, and on this list, I've got 3 absolutely killer ones, starting with Stalker.
Stalker, huh?
Now, this is a movie I admittedly is not for everybody. Not only is it in Russian, you're gonna have to read subtitles, but the concept here is so bizarre and so bizarrely presented that if you don't really have a taste or a palate for artsier films, it's gonna be hard to swallow this one. But for anyone who enjoys really thought-provoking movies that present you with something new and unique, Stalker is a must-watch. This too is very long, and you will have to read subtitles, although this movie is not particularly chatty. It actually revolves around this place known as the Zone. People are not really allowed to go in there, but you follow a group of guys who are going in. And in this zone, there's bizarre things that can happen. Not only does it play with your mind, but there are booby traps all over the place, and you have to be careful how you navigate it. Yet don't expect to see something like The Maze Runner with this movie. This is not an action movie. No one's running for their life. There's not actually a monster coming to kill anyone. It's all very cerebral, yet incredibly effective if you let yourself get into this one. If you don't, you're gonna be lost from the very beginning and like beyond lost by the time they get to the center of this zone. But if you can hang with Stalker, it is a truly, truly mind-blowing sci-fi film that has influenced a lot of stuff. You gotta watch the whole movie to get a taste for that though. Inland Empire is one I debated on not putting on this list because it too is not for everyone.
You have a new role to play, I hear.
Up for a role?
No. I definitely heard that you have it.
Now this is the last feature film from director David Lynch. If you're not into his work already, Inland Empire is probably not the place you want to start, but if you've enjoyed any of his other movies, like Mulholland Drive in particular, then Inland Empire is a very curious one. I think it is one of his strangest movies, mainly in the way that he filmed it, not necessarily in all the themes. He's done weirder stuff than Inland Empire, but the way he decided to film it and present it is so bizarre and so kind of amateur looking, yet he takes you to a place that it just honestly baffles me. It's confusing to me, as someone who watches an ungodly amount of movies, how something like Inland Empire can seem so, again, just amateurish and rough, yet be so effective at not just creeping me out, but making me feel all sorts of weird feelings I don't normally feel. Some of them I don't want to feel, but again, I'm mesmerized at how effective his movies are at making me feel things. Speaking of that though, I should probably do a David Lynch shirt like this one. If you want to pick up this one or any other shirts I sell, they're only available at darrenvandam.com/shop. But we're gonna wrap up the weird segment here with a real bizarre one that is not for everyone. In fact, my next pick, not only does it have Spanish language subtitles, it is one of the most disturbing movies you could currently catch on Max, and they have some disturbing movies right now, but The Last Circus is a doozy. In this movie, you follow a bunch of characters, but mostly you're following two circus clowns that end up falling for the same woman. So you've got a love triangle, except these clowns, while they don't seem particularly psychotic at the beginning of the movie, love for this woman definitely takes them there. This movie goes to some wild directions, and when you think it can't get any wilder, it somehow manages to like double down on the weirdness and become even crazier. This movie features some graphic imagery, a lot of it actually, so if you've got a sensitive stomach or anything like that, do not pursue this movie no matter what. It's going to disgust you, but it is not just a gross out movie. It's actually really interesting, and again, eyebrow raising, to say the least.
Who cares about eyebrows?
Now, I'd like to mention a few comedies. They've got some great ones on Max, but in this segment, I am going to mention some that I think have been overlooked, starting with Duplicity. This stars Clive Owen and Julia Roberts, and I think is one of Julia Roberts' most underrated movies for sure. This is actually from the same writer-director who did Michael Clayton, and while I do think Michael Clayton is the better movie, this is actually a really funny movie he did right on the heels of Michael Clayton. And it's all about corporate espionage. So it's a spy movie, but the stakes are not the end of the world here. Paul Giamatti's even got a really great role in this as well. And I'll say, I recommend Duplicity just on the face of it being about corporate espionage alone. But it's also really charming and funny. It's got a bit of a love story in the mix. It's kind of a crowd pleaser.
What is that?
It's a thong. It was in your closet.
You're gaming me.
I'm certain I'm gonna get some dislikes on this video for this next recommendation. I know that remakes and reboots have their flaws. In fact, more often than not, they're pretty terrible. But one that I thought was a real riot and well worth revisiting was Vacation.
Are you serious?
Now, this is essentially a reboot. I mean, technically, it's classified as a sequel. Ed Helms is actually playing Rusty from the Vacation movies. He's grown up, he's got a family all his own, he's married to Christina Applegate, and he wants to take his family on a cross-country trip to Wally World. But I found the jokes in this movie to be genuinely funny, without feeling like they're rehashing every little thing from all the Vacation movies. In fact, they don't really rehash anything except for the fact that they're going to Wally World and they're on a cross-country trip. There is a little nod to Christy Brinkley in the Ferrari, but for the most part, it's all fresh ideas, which I think is what makes this movie work. On top of it being full of funny people, and the director here would go on to do the new Dungeons & Dragons movie, which I also thought was very funny. He also did the movie Game Night, which I thought was very funny. So if you've enjoyed any of those and you skipped Vacation because you don't like reboots, it's an exceptional one.
I found a dart.
Are you crazy?
Everybody out of here, quick!
And then we'll do another classic on this list because, again, Max is the only streaming service that has hundreds of classic movies. One of my personal favorites, though, is Mr. Roberts.
Frank, where's the rest of that alcohol we were drinking last night?
Henry Fonda and Jack Lemmon star in this, and you follow the crew on a supply ship in the Pacific in World War II, and they're becoming restless. In fact, Mr. Roberts, played by Henry Fonda, sort of dreams about joining the war and contributing more than he is stuck on the supply ship. And that's kind of what the movie's about. It's actually quite poignant by the time you get to the end, but because all these guys are so restless on this boat, they're trying to get women on the boat, they're trying to make fake whiskey, pranking each other in various ways. And again, it ends up coming around and telling a pretty beautiful story that kind of takes you by surprise. Where it's headed takes you by surprise, but for a movie from 1955, it's surprising how funny this movie still is today. If you're a fan of anyone involved and you somehow never saw this gem, it's fantastic.
6 marbles. I'm looking for marbles all day long.
Now, unlike usual, I actually want to wrap up this list with some shows that I highly recommend. They're only available on Max, starting with a very unique show titled How To with John Wilson.
So do you have strong thoughts about scaffolding?
No, not at the moment.
Now, this is created by one man in a New York apartment, and it is amazing television. It kind of blurs the line between content creation, like what I do here, and TV production. John Wilson hosts this show. It's kind of like guerrilla journalism. Each episode tackles a different topic, but the way he films these is so funny. Most of the episodes are loaded with different footage of things happening around New York City, bizarre, unique things that are kind of, in most cases, pretty unique to New York.
Unique New York.
But his narration goes along with what you're seeing on screen, so it's funny in a very unique manner, but it's also interesting in an equally unique way.
Making you uncomfortable?
No. Actually, yeah, a little bit.
Now, a real brutal crime series from the UK that is several years old now, but I think is still criminally underrated is Luther, starring Idris Elba. Because it's from the UK, the seasons are only about 6 episodes long, and the episodes themselves can run over an hour. Luther feels very much like a movie, and it is a killer cop show. Not only is he this sort of rough and tumble cop that doesn't quite play by the rules, you know, the type you've seen in American movies for decades, but the villains that they create in Luther are heinous. I mean, vicious, almost comic book style villains that he has to take down. It is just an incredibly compelling show. I'll say if you like cop dramas, shows like The Shield, definitely check out Luther, but this is a brutal show. Now, while this is on Max now, there is a movie that kind of follows up on the series that is a Netflix original. So if you get into Luther over on Max, go check out the movie over on Netflix. I know that's a pain in the ass, but that's how it goes. Now, to wrap it up, I've got 2 animated series that have absolutely blown my mind, or at least one has, and then the other one is brand new. I've only watched the 2 episodes that have premiered so far, but Primal is an amazing animated show. This is from the same creator as Samurai Jack, but this is a bloody show. Like, this is not for children. It revolves around a caveman and a Tyrannosaurus Rex. I realize that they did not exist together, but it works for this show. But the entire first season are these incredible, harrowing stories of like surviving these incredible beasts that exist in this kind of prehistoric world. Story-wise, it's very comic booky, feels very much like a graphic novel, but visually, it is surprisingly cinematic. Like, a lot of the storytelling is told in the framing and the editing, and as a movie nerd, I really geeked out on the first season of Primal. Now, it continues to be good, but the first handful of episodes, I think, are still highly rewatchable. I've watched several of them multiple times. Again, it is cinematic stuff.
The cinematography, the editing techniques.
And then my final recommendation is another adult animated series that they just put on Max. In fact, they're only 3 episodes in at the time of me releasing this. It's titled Common Side Effects.
Can I tell you a secret?
Yeah, please.
Okay, just go with me for a minute. The caviar, the ghost orchid of mushrooms. We spend more money than ever on healthcare, and everyone's still sick.
And it revolves around the discovery of a new mushroom that's capable of healing just about anything. So that's interesting, but there's also drug company conspiracy stuff happening in the story as well. Mike Judge, the creator of Beavis and Butthead, The King of the Hill, Office Space, he voices the head of a drug company. And the series has kind of a Mike Judge feel in its concept, but in its delivery, it's actually kind of heavy and also fairly funny. In the first episode, if you're not into it by the time you see the DEA agents dancing to jump in the line in their car, then maybe the show's not for you. But at that moment in the first episode, along with everything else that preceded it, I was hooked on this show. I can't wait to see where it goes. Here's a quick recap of all the movies we discussed. If you're new to the channel, not only do I put out videos like this every single week, but I typically focus on movies that are a little harder to find or movies you've maybe overlooked. This episode in particular, I just wanted to focus on my absolute top picks out of everything available on Max right now. But that is the list. Don't forget to go check out that factor link down in the video description and to use my code 50FlickConnection to save half off your first order and to get free shipping. But I'll keep making these episodes as long as y'all keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this special Max episode, especially for checking it out to the very end here. But you will see me on the next one.